Wow. Hey, look at that. Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's program. Uh, if you had gotten up early this morning and spent a couple of hours up at Bear Divide, which, if you don't know, it's a tiny spot near the west end of the Angeles National Forest, you would have seen more than 80 western tanagers this morning, more than 70 Wilson's warblers, some warbling vireos, some lazuli buntings, and a bunch of other species. More than 50 species today alone at that one spot, according to Ebird. They all pass through this one area, no bigger in size than a few tennis courts. And those numbers today are nothing unusual. During the few weeks of spring, as many as 100,000 migrating birds fly past Bear Divide on their northern migration up the Pacific Flyway. It turns out that this tiny spot right in our own backyard might be one of the best places in the country to observe spring migration. Tonight's speaker is one of the scientists leading the effort to record the spring migration through Bear Divide and to learn more about the factors that affect that migration. Ryan Terrill is a postdoctoral researcher at the Moore Lab of Zoology at Occidental College. In addition to his work leading the survey team up at Bear Divide, Dr. Terrill is an expert on the evolution of feather molting in birds. He studies how human-caused habitat change has impacted the birds of Mexico, and he's a member of the California Bird Records Committee. So he's one of the people you're going to need to convince that, yes, you really did see a penguin last week up in Yosemite. A couple quick items before we begin. First of all, a little bit of full disclosure. Pasadena Audubon Society is one of the organizations that funds Dr. Terrill's research up at Bear Divide. We'd like to remind everyone watching tonight that we welcome questions for tonight's speaker. Just type them into the chat area here in Zoom, and we'll get to them after the presentation. And as we mentioned, we're recording this presentation. We'll get it up on our YouTube channel in a few days, and we'd like to thank Dr. Terrill for letting us to record. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's welcome tonight's speaker, Dr. Ryan Terrill. Ryan?
Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it. It's a very sweet introduction.
I think yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Yep, we see your
Just
screen.
getting my slides up now. Really appreciate the introduction, and thanks everybody for having me. Thanks for coming, and yeah, thanks for showing up and checking out what we've been doing up at Bear Divide. And like Chris said, if you had even come today, you would have seen a lot of birds. Today was a really good day, actually. I had over 900, almost 920 yellow warblers. That's just yellow warblers, which is, I'm pretty sure it must be the high count we've ever had there. So it's still rocking and rolling. So pardon me if I'm a little tired and sunburned. I've been getting up at 4:30 every day to go up there lately because it's still been pretty fun. But what I'll try to do here is give you a little overview of just what the deal is at Bear Divide, what's going on up there, and a little bit about what we've been trying to do up there. So Bear Divide is, as Chris was saying, it's the spot in the western San Gabriel Mountains that is a little gap where migrant birds fly through. And I've got a little video here. Oh, there we go. Sorry. I've got a little video here of birds flying through. It's kind of tough to see at first, and then more birds come through. So just kind of keep your eyes out for the little dots and listen for the noises, and just to kind of give you an impression of what it's like up there. Oof. You see how much is moving through right now? We'll just call these passing spots because I'm taking a video. God, we're like 80. Wilson's just like trying to burn. Another violet green. Two more teenagers, grosbeak, Wilson's, teenager, Ladley. So hopefully you could see some of that, but that was, dozens and dozens of birds flying through just in that moment. The cool thing is, I mean, there are a lot of cool things about it, but these are mostly birds that we think of as nocturnal migrants that mostly migrate at night and mostly migrate high up in the atmosphere. And they're, these things are flying a couple feet off the ground and all moving through this one spot. So it's a really cool place. You can hear how excited we were. This was one of the first years we were up there, and it was one of the first really big days we had ever had up there. The other person up there is Chris Dean, who I'm sure many of you know is very excitable and very fun person to be out in the field with. So yeah, it's a super cool spot. In the short amount of time we've been working up there, only the past couple years, we've already had a day with almost 14,000 birds. We've had a lot of days with 8 to 10,000 birds, which is just absolutely nuts. Like really just birds flying through that gap in a single morning. What's going on there is something we call morning flight or dawn flight. And we're still kind of trying to figure out what exactly morning flight is. But generally, it's this phenomenon where birds that fly at night and high in the atmosphere can be seen flying lower down and in the morning. This is a phenomenon that's known from the East Coast, famous places like Cape May, North Point in Louisiana, Tadoussac Dunes in Canada, and there's a few spots in Europe. And the thought, some of these places originally was that some of this was birds reorienting, birds finding themselves out over water or out where there isn't food somewhere, and then turning around and coming back, which may or may not be the case at some of these places, but might not be the case at Bear Divide. So we're still trying to figure out really why morning flight happens and if it is the same reason in different places or different reasons in different places. One of the really cool things about Bear Divide, though, is that of these morning flights, most of them are located on flyways on the East Coast and in Europe. And we don't really have very many morning flight spots on the Pacific coast. And now we're starting to discover some more and some kind of smaller sites, but not a lot of really big morning flight sites on the Pacific coast. Really the only other kind of major morning flight site, really the only other morning flight site that was known, more than a few years ago, is this spot called Britt Spring, which is out in eastern Kern County, which is this kind of north-south canyon that starts wide at the bottom and then gets narrower and narrower. And so the birds are probably funneling up the canyon, and they're over desert, so there's kind of maybe nowhere for them to feed. And then they see this little spring. And it's a pretty cool spot. It's a spot I used to go bird a lot when I was a kid. And especially in the spring, it's just, it's a really cool place. You can go out and see lots of birds migrating over and coming through. And it's a very unique spot. And so I was super excited to hear about birds migrating through Bear Divide and that it might be something similar to butterbread. This all started about 5 years ago when I was in Louisiana, finishing up graduate school. My good buddy Dan Maxwell was up there. In fact, I'll get to him in a minute, and saw a lot of birds moving through and told me about it when I was moving out here. So my first few springs here, I decided to go up there a few times and just try to see, okay, was it a one-off thing? Was it a fluke? Or is there actually a lot of stuff coming through? So another cool thing about Bear Divide is it is, right, really directly adjacent to one of the world's largest major metropolitan areas. There are millions of people living within an hour drive of Bear Divide. And one of the reasons I was able to start going up there is because, it's only 30 minutes from my house. I could go up before work. So it's pretty cool to have this site that's so cool and unique and spectacular, really just, right next to Los Angeles. What we think is possibly going on at Bear Divide, this is a figure from a recent publication that we published about Bear Divide, is that as birds are, if you kind of pay attention to these red arrows, which are kind of these hypothetical flight paths I drew, birds flying north over the LA basin, and I put fog over the lower elevations so you could see where the lower elevations were. If they're trying to stay relatively low, the San Gabriels are really steep, and so they hit the San Gabriels and don't really want to go up them and get pushed northwest. And then this first set of canyons, of low canyons, Cagle Canyon and Little Tahunga Canyon, just like Butterette, start really wide at the base and get narrower and narrower and narrower as they go up. So this is kind of the first low spot. Maybe they dip into these canyons and then they get funneled into this this really narrow pass if they're trying to kind of stay low. That's sort of our current best guess of at least why birds are coming through that spot. In the past couple of years, the first couple of years that we were up there, we were just sort of birding intermittently. And then starting last year, we were able to secure funding from Pasadena Audubon to pay a counter to be up there every day. So last year it was this tall guy, Devin Camerix-Birk, who was up there counting every day in the spring, him and Matt Brady. And this year we got funding again from Pasadena Audubon and from LA Birders to pay counters to be up there this year. This year it's been mostly me and Kelsey Reckling and Marky Mutzler, who are both expert birders and also working in our lab. So what we've been able to do is, once we realized what a cool spot it was, we realized the importance of trying to get really regular data up there and having somebody be up there basically every day. We were doing 5 days a week. Now we're trying to do more or less every day we can when people are available. And not just to count the birds, but to try to keep track of when and where birds are coming by. So we take weather data every hour. We set up this tablet running this app called Dunkadoo, which it's basically like a digital clicker. You see these big buttons for the different species. So as you press a species, it logs that bird went by at that time. And so we can have time data of like the exact minute of all the species going by. And then we can associate that with wind and clouds and weather and radar data and stuff like that. So we've been trying to really dig into what the heck's going on up there. The cool thing about this is we broadcast these data live. If you go to our website, beardivide.org, you can check out the data as they're coming in. This is a little screenshot I took a year or two ago of what Dunkadoo looks like when we're broadcasting data. You see orange crown went by, 10 yellow worms went by, 3 purple finches. So it's kind of cool. You can literally watch the birds go by live on the website when we're counting up there. And there's a few other ways to look at these data. This is what it looks like on your cell phone, where you can see all the species by numbers. So here, this is a day with a lot of yellow-rumped warblers, the red squares. So 30 went by here, and then 20, and then 30 again. And so there's a bunch of different ways to look at the data, both live and retroactively online. So for example, you can look by day, how many species we had in the day, how many individuals, and then how many, if you go down here by species, how many we had in each hour in total, and you can look at species composition, and the stuff's all interactive, and the species by time of year. So we're really trying to build up this big database of not just how many birds are coming through, but what species and when, what season, what time of the year, and also what time of day. Another cool thing about Bear Divide is it's kind of, I would say it's fun for everyone, and I think the young birders saw that. It's the really, crazy hardcore birders love it, I think, because, there's a lot of birds that are tough to see in migration that you can see in migration pretty easily here. For example, willow flycatcher is, not the easiest bird in LA County, but, I saw like 18 there this morning, and, stuff like hermit and Nashville warbler, which maybe you get 1s or 2s of here and there around LA, you can see hundreds in a day at Bear Divide. And also rare stuff, had black swifts the last couple days and cool stuff like that. But then all the way down to beginners or people who've never birded before. When you take people out who haven't birded before, or kids or whatever, and you give them binoculars and you're like, oh, there's the Western tanager way up in the top of that tree, and they're trying to see, and maybe they do see it, maybe they don't. Whereas Bear Divide on a good day, you can literally just stand there like in a river of birds, and like hopefully you saw in my video, stuff just kind of zipping right by your knees. And so even if you can't identify stuff, you don't know what you're looking at, it's a really spectacular phenomenon, and it's something that I think everybody can kind of appreciate. So that's kind of the public angle too. It really kind of brings everybody in, and it's exciting no matter who you are. We've taken this opportunity to engage with students. This is one of our undergraduate ornithology classes, and we've had elementary to middle school students to college students, and now the Pasadena young bird group up there, which is pretty fun. It's very cool. Here's a shot I like of an oriole just flying over everybody. I just want to kind of briefly go through a little bit of what we've learned so far from studying birds up at Bear Divide. We've had some cool stuff, some cool rarities like summer tanager. We've had a few blue grosbeaks, which are sort of these uncommon local riparian breeders that I didn't really expect to get up there. And these are things that'll kind of fill in. There's like rose-breasted grosbeak last year. I'm sure we'll get some like eastern warblers and stuff eventually, but so we do get these kind of goodies. We've had chimney swifts up there last year, so we get some of these kind of goodies, and we've had really different years. Year to year, the species composition can change a lot. So for example, last year it was a huge finch year. We had tons of purple finches, tons of Cassin's finches, and quite a lot of siskins, whereas before that we had there are a few purple finches, some siskins, and no Cassin's finches. We got our first Cassin's finch ever last year, and then we had them like every single day. And then again this year, that's all dipped down. Way fewer purple finches, only 2 Caston's finches, way fewer siskins, but American goldfinches are way up. We had, we've only ever had, very small numbers of American goldfinches, whereas this year we've had pretty big numbers. And so year to year, especially with finches, things can be pretty different, is one of the things we're starting to learn. Another thing that we're starting to get a handle on is sex-based migration timing, especially with kind of trying to take a lot of photos of things. So we know, and there's some theory about, in most species, male birds migrate first to try to set up on a good territory before the females. But it's hard to get a lot of good data on that. And that's one of the cool things we can do at Bear Divide is get, especially with the species like Western Tanager, where you can tell the sexes apart pretty easily, we can start to get a handle on sex-based migration timing. And really, in general, a lot of the stuff that you can sex easily, like tanagers and hermit warblers and tassel warblers and stuff, like the males come through for 2 to 3 weeks, really, before we even start to see females. The main exception to that is phainopeplas, which seem to migrate more or less together. They're, the males and females really seem to migrate just about at the same time, which is weird. And we're not entirely sure why. But it could have to do with they're sort of doing a different thing. They're not necessarily coming from a breeding ground. They may be moving after breeding to go to a second breeding attempt. And that's something we'll get back into in a little bit. Another cool thing is we've had quite a few hybrids and intergrades. And bonus points for anybody in the chat who can tell me the difference between a hybrid and an intergrade. It's a good pop quiz question. So for example, this Audubon's myrtle yellow warbler, it's got the yellow in the throat like an Audubon's, but the nice white supracinum like a myrtle, and the white hooks on the side like a myrtle, and even the underparts are half and half. It's got that smudgy black breast of an Audubon's and the streaks of a myrtle. So that's kind of cool. We've had quite a few of those. We've also had quite a few Townsend's hermit warblers, and like every single one of those is like different. So here, this bird basically is the head of a hermit and the body of a Townsend's warbler. And this bird has the head of a Townsend's warbler and the body of a hermit warbler. It's pretty cool. So it's been fun to kind of start pulling that stuff out. Some kind of local breeders that are, they are migrants, but we see them very rarely on migration, like this black-chinned sparrow, or like last year, there's a gray vireo, which is another bird that, they're very local, very rare breeders, but basically never seen on migration. They're basically like, teleport between their wintering and breeding grounds. So it's pretty cool to see some of this stuff actively migrating. We've also had some local movements that were bigger than expected that may not be entirely local. And band-tailed pigeon is a big one of those. And let me skip forward, sorry, but I just want to show you this range map because it's kind of interesting. So this is middle of January. And in California, so band-tailed pigeon goes from the West Coast all the way down the Andes into northern Bolivia. In South America and Central America, they're almost certainly residents. And here in California, they're resident. We have them all around here all year long in Southern California. And so, I expected that we might just see a few flying around here and there, but we actually get lots and lots of band-tailed pigeons flying north, just like any other migrant in the spring. And if you watch the range map, so this is the winter. Now here's spring. Watch Oregon and Washington and British Columbia. All these birds move up into here in the summer. And then as the fall comes, they all leave. So even though they're residents here, this whole northern part of the range, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, all those birds get out of there. And so, we don't know yet. We still, maybe this is something, for example, the Motus towers that Pasadena is planning on funding to put up can help us learn. But a lot of these, we have so many band-tailed pigeons, so many of them are flying north. I bet that it's a lot of these Oregon, Washington, Vancouver birds that are coming down and wintering in Southern California and then going back up. It's something pretty cool. It's something I certainly didn't expect when we started counting there. And then now I'll go back to phainopeplas. So I mentioned phainopeplas earlier, that they're one of the species that the males and females kind of migrate together. And there's this recent paper just a couple of years ago from this researcher named Dan Baldassari out of the State University of New York at Oswego, who put GPS tags on phainopeplas that were breeding in oak woodlands in the coastal slopes in Southern California. And basically all of these birds, once they were done breeding, they flew out to the desert, specifically the Sonora and Chihuahua deserts. So Arizona, New Mexico, even the states of Sonora and Chihuahua in Mexico, way east, way into the desert, and they bred again in the monsoons. And the timing of when we get phainopeplas here, which is mainly May, late May into June, had quite a few phainopeplas today, coincides with that. And so, a lot of the, most of the birds we see as migrants here are wintering in Mexico, South America, and they're going north to breed in the mountains. But phainopeplas are doing something completely different. They're breeding on the coast slopes and the oaks, and then they're funneling through and out to go back out to the deserts to breed again in the monsoons, which is real weird and really cool. And again, phainopepla is something that is around all year round and low numbers. And, before counting up there, I thought we would have just seen a few here and there. And we do get really big numbers of phainopeplas flying north through Ebird Divide. So that's another really cool thing we've kind of started to learn. Showed you band-tailed pigeon already. Another cool thing is Cassin's kingbird. So if you're from Southern California, or if you've lived here for a long time, you probably think of Cassin's kingbird, rightfully so, as a year-round, resident endemic to Trader Joe's parking lots. But most of the range where they breed, Arizona, New Mexico, in the Great Basin, they're actually migrants and they breed. So this is winter again. You can see spring. They all come up into the Great Basin, and they actually breed in highland, kind of plateaus, pinyon juniper woodland. And so even though they're year-round resident and, through their range in Southern California, most of their range, they're actually a long-distance migrant, a fairly long-distance migrant, pretty obligatory migrant. Well, one thing we found in the past couple of years is, especially early season, especially March and early April, we actually get decent pushes. And by decent, I mean, 14, 15, 20 birds in a day, but birds moving north of Cassin's kingbirds. And so these birds, as you see, these birds that are wintering in Baja, a lot of them winter in southern Baja, they are also getting out of there, right? You see them all kind of leaving. Now there's none in southern Baja. So they have to go up Baja and then go somewhere. Either they're coming up to breed in Central California, or they're skipping out over the Great Basin. But that could be the birds, the timing of that coincides with when we see Cassin's kingbirds moving north. So for me, I didn't think we'd see any Cassin's kingbirds up there, except maybe if they were breeding, which they do sometimes. But it's pretty astounded to see Cassin's kingbirds migrating through there. But when we look at the overall range, especially these birds wintering in Baja California, it does make sense. It's pretty cool. So we still want to be really cool to find out where these birds are coming from and where they're going to. I think the most important takeaway that we've learned is that the San Gabriel Mountains seem to be a really important corridor for land bird migration in the Pacific Flyway. It's not something I think I would have particularly thought. We think of Southern California as having a huge diversity of birds, especially beta diversity, which is, different bird communities in different spots because there's different habitats. And we can see lots of species of birds, and, we can get rarities, especially in the winter and the fall and stuff, but not particularly as a corridor or a throughway for huge numbers of migrating birds. And it seems to be something we're discovering, especially the low foothills of the transverse mountains like the San Gabriels. They seem to host, many, many thousands of migrating birds every year, which is pretty amazing. And it's something that, we're still trying to get a handle on, and we are going to continue to try to get a handle on through this work. Just kind of want to go through when some of these birds migrate at Ebird Divide, like this Audubon's warbler. So these are just kind of the 14 most common species that are migrating through Ebird Divide. So from left is the beginning of April, and then the right is beginning of May, and they're ordered. They're ordered by mean passage date. So the bird on top is the bird that, the average individual of the species comes through earliest, which is yellow-rumped warbler, and then on the bottom, the average individual species comes through latest, which is yellow warbler. So you can see not only is there variation in when they come through, yellow rumps are earlier, then orange crowns, then black-throated grays, all the way down to yellow warblers, but there's big variation in kind of the spread, right? Like yellow rumps are pretty spread out, as are yellow warblers, but then some things like Nashville warblers and Wilson's warblers, black-headed grosbeaks are pretty compressed, right? We think that probably has to do with latitudinal breeding range. And so in general, we think that migrating birds that breed farther south show up on their breeding range earlier and migrate earlier. And birds that breed farther north, they show up later. So for example, we get hooded orioles, breeding hooded orioles back here in LA in early March, basically. And if that bird was trying to go all the way to Alaska, it would have another month and a half or 2 months of like deep freeze, right? So basically the birds that are going north just kind of have to wait longer. And so species that have a smaller latitudinal breeding distribution, like black-headed grosbeak or Lasley bunting, they kind of all come through at once, whereas species that are spread out, like yellow-rumped warbler that breeds from here in Southern California all the way up to Alaska, same with yellow warbler, breeds here in Southern California all the way up to Northern Alaska, have really spread out breeding, times when they come through. And when we just compare the mean passage date by species to the median breeding latitude, we do recover that relationship where birds that breed farther north tend to migrate later. One of the things, everybody, when they come up there, they're always saying, okay, so when's it going to be good? Oh, the wind's doing this, the clouds are doing that. Is it going to be great? And, after like 5 years of going up there really regularly, I still don't know. And I'm still regularly surprised. But, we do have some ideas. In general, birds tend to like better weather, higher pressure, clearer skies. They seem to like a little bit of wind. I'm kind of split on whether wind makes a difference at all. Like really, really windy can still be good at Bear Divide. Totally dead wind, maybe not quite as good. It seems like they need at least maybe some wind, but I'm still not sure of that. But generally when the weather's better, there are more birds. So that's weather, positive relationship, and then date, by species. And so this kind of works okay. Like, okay, the weather's better. Is it in the window? That works all right. But what seems to be really important is this kind of buildup and depletion effect. What I'm kind of lately have been calling the pool of potential migrants. So you imagine, the date may be affecting birds showing up in the Southern California area. So they kind of want to migrate at that time. And then the weather affects whether or not they leave LA and go up through Bear Divide. And we see this, like, when it's foggy and cold and the weather's not great during spring, birds seem to pile up in LA. And so, before the biggest days, so that 14,000 bird day we had at Bear Divide, that was after, 2 weeks of really bad weather during peak migration season. And even the day before, birders around LA were telling me, I went out to my local park and it was just dripping with birds. There were birds everywhere. And so I think birds kind of build up as the weather's bad, and then when the weather's good, they move. And then there's a similar kind of depletion effect where the weather's been really good for a while and everything that wants to move has moved, and the numbers go down a bit. And so I wrote a little computer model to try to simulate this, not just simulate this, but kind of pump it through real weather data to see how well it fit what we see at Bear Divide. And so this is kind of the buildup and depletion effects, where the red is the pool of potential migrants, just the number of individual birds scaled that are around LA, and then how many birds I'd expect to pass, and then the ranked weather quality. And when you compare the predictions from this model, which are in red, to the observations, it's actually pretty good. You see the peaks line up pretty well and the troughs line up pretty well. And it's a lot better than just looking at weather. And so this kind of buildup and depletion effect does seem to be real, and it certainly explains the data better than just weather by itself. And so this is another kind of thing that we're really interested in looking into at Bear Divide. Just kind of wrap up and summarize, we're really just scratching the surface here. This is the tip of the iceberg of what's going on. There's so much to learn. There's so much going on. And even in a place, where so many people live, so many people are interested in birds, there's so many expert birders, we still just have so much to learn about what's going on with birds around here. And so that's what we're trying to do. And really appreciate the help that we've gotten from Pasadena Audubon. If any individual people want to help out more, you check out the website, you come visit Bear Divide. We're always interested in gear or money donations to pay counters or buy gear, or think about future projects, stuff like that. And I'd like to thank everybody who's helped out. And I didn't really have time to get to, but another really cool operation that's popped up the last 2 years is a bird banding operation, which I'm sure many of you have gotten to see, that I'm not directly involved with, but we kind of work hand in hand with them, and super supportive of what they're doing. And it's really a great complementary data set to what we've been doing. Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'll take any questions that anybody has.
Okay. Thanks very much, Ryan. We do have a number of questions. One of the questions in the chat has to do with that graph that you had up about yeah, that's a lovely graph, by the way.
Thank you.
And the question was up at the top. You can see the number of hours that volunteers have put in on different days observing. How much are the rise and fall of these graphs influenced by that? Like, on days when you have more observers, do you always see more birds, or do you think you're pretty much capturing all the birds that are coming past, regardless of the number of people looking?
Yeah, so one thing is this observer hours. This figure is from our paper that we published on the first 2 years, so this doesn't include this year or last year. Certainly, effort is related to birds we see. Clearly, if we're not there, we're not seeing birds. But we clearly aren't seeing everything. One of the things is, there's kind of two areas, and it can be pretty spread out. So we try to count in the same spot that is traditionally the best, but isn't necessarily the best every day, just to be consistent. And so you can see how the effort in observer hours is really kind of staggered, whereas the plots are smoothed. And so as we analyze these data, by keeping track of observer hours, we can try to account for that. So we don't see every single bird, and we don't think we will. But one of the things we can do by keeping track of the effort we put in is then account for that and sort of interpolate and extrapolate what we think is probably going on.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
It does. It does. It does. Carl was up there looking at birds, and he saw a group of Sanderlings fly right through the gap, and thought that was a very unusual thing to see. Any
Certainly.
ideas? Any ideas why Sanderlings would be passing through the Angeles mountains?
First of all, I'm jealous because I'm crazy about my bear divide list and don't have Sanderling on it. I don't think we've ever heard of Sanderlings coming through there, but it is not. But I certainly believe it. We do have water birds, and we've had shorebirds coming through there a number of times. In fact, Western sandpipers are fairly regular. We've had flocks of Western sandpipers come through Bear Divide 3 or 4 different times this year, and a few other times in previous years. And we've also had herons and geese and ducks and stuff. And so I think a lot of times shorebirds take the same migration routes as land birds. Shorebirds don't necessarily stick to the coast, and we think of Sanderling as a really coastal bird because they are here, but they breed pretty inland in the Arctic tundra. And so a lot of birds like that, black-bellied plovers the same way, where they're almost entirely coastal in their wintering range, but they breed well inland. And so a lot of these birds may be going inland, or because Southern California is east-west and then north-south, a lot of stuff could just be cutting the corner of Point Conception, or just a little bit lost.
I see. Yeah, it's easy for us to forget here, so close to the coast, how, yeah, as you say, how far inland shorebirds can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. A question about the reports that go into Ebird, the bear divide. First of all, do you also enter all the bear divide sightings into Ebird?
Yeah, we keep track of everything in our own database, on that Dunkadoo database, so we can have a timestamp for every bird. But then at the end of the day, we enter a list into Ebird. Okay. I mean, if you just go to the hotspot on Ebird, or go to our website and go to the link, you can check out the lists that we put in Ebird, and that's where we put all these photos. Sorry.
No, I was just saying. And then, like, as you see a big wave coming through Bear Divide, do you then kind of see a wave happening, being reported in Ebird, further north up the Pacific Flyway? And in the days before a big wave hits Bear Divide, are you seeing reports, I don't know, in San Diego, northern Mexico? Do you see big spikes down there?
It's a good question. I haven't really looked into that. We do. There's a spot in San Diego called Mount Soledad where people see dawn migration. It's a kind of on a bit of a smaller scale than Bear Divide, but it does seem to line up a bit where if they have a good day, we might have kind of a good day the next day. But it's hard to tell, and I'm not sure whether it's I don't know if it's all the same birds just kind of going by in a wave, or if every spot is more dictated by the local weather and local conditions. I think it's more kind of the latter, but I don't know, and I haven't really looked into it, and that's a really good idea to look into.
Okay. I I have a question just about the site in general. You mentioned briefly at the beginning who kind of discovered the site. I guess my question is, you know, people have been birding in the Los Angeles area for a century. How did it take us so long to discover this place?
You tell me. I
Yeah,
wasn't here.
yeah, right. Yeah, okay.
No,
Uh,
I'm kidding. I never would have found the spot if Dan didn't just happen upon it.
right.
People, birders around here have told me, especially when I first started birding up here, and I was talking to John Feinster and Luke Tiller about this. They both told me like, yeah, I've seen movements of passing coming through the San Gabriels. It seems to be a thing. I haven't always had time to like stop and do a count, but it's like, there's certainly stuff moving through. And so I think it was known, certainly seems to have been known, and Luke can probably chime in on this, that birds were using these elevations to migrate. But I think that it's nobody had ever quite happened upon this spot that just really seems to funnel all these birds through and be such a cool place. I mean, the thing is, there's so many days where I go up there and stand there for 2 hours and I'm bored out of my mind because I'm not seeing anything. So, you could have put in a good bit of concerted effort up there and never known. You just have to know that it's a good spot and put in the time, and then you'll hit the really good days. And Dan just happened to be up there on a really good day. And so how many other spots there are like this? There undoubtedly are. It's just, they could be hard to find.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if anyone is kind of taking the process of looking at the topography, firing up some GIS, looking at places that seem to have a similar type of funneling terrain, and then getting some researchers up there in the spring or the fall to see if we might look into other spots along transverse ranges.
It's a good idea. And Richard Crossley is up in the northern part of the county, and he's been doing some of that to success. He's been finding good numbers of birds moving through, especially kind of the I-5 corridor north and east of Quail Lake. So that certainly seems to be another area. It's not quite, doesn't seem to be quite the funnel that this area is, where everything's really close and low and all together, but it does seem to host often really, really big numbers of migrating birds. So yeah, I think there's a lot more to be looked at.
Uh, about
So
that book.
just if I could just add a couple of things just to that. So when I did Corey Husick and I did a field trip to Barley Flats. Well, it was one of the stops on near Upper Big Tahunga about a month ago, and we had not the numbers that not kind of numbers that that you can see at Bear Divide, but we did have a kind of a similar movement across the kind of the saddle there, and John Feinster kind of talked to a bunch of years ago. I think that's what Ryan's referring to. Try to talk Laura's son into standing on one of these saddles in the morning and looking for migrant birds, but it kind of never came to. I guess it took someone to actually run with that idea, and Ryan ran with it. And then the other thing that was kind of interesting to me was in October one year, I was doing a kind of some birding with Catherine, and over I think it's called Lightning Ridge. It's the saddle just before Grassy, or just on Blue Ridge Road, and had a kind of a similar thing. We had some black swifts come over, and we had like orange crown warblers kind of coming up the desert side and dropping over into the. So I don't know whether that was just a one-off of that day, but it was kind of interesting that the birds were kind of like going the opposite direction to they do at Bear Divide and coming into the basin. So who knows?
Was that in the autumn then?
Yeah, that was in October. Yeah.
Gotcha. A question that I've had a number of people ask me that I've told about describe Bear Divide to. Why isn't it good in the autumn? Why don't we also no idea. Okay.
I went up there a few times this fall just to make sure. Yeah. And yeah, there weren't any more birds than, I think standing around anywhere else in the mountain. I think it's just the topography. I think it's really stuff staying low and getting funneled into LA and getting kind of pushed this way. Whereas the fall, that's not quite happening. To the north of us are the Santa Ynez Mountains and the Tehachapi Mountains, like a couple big mountain ranges. So from here, if you're coming south, you're staying low, you get pushed to Bear Divide and then have to tackle those mountain ranges. But from the north, it's like you have to go over a couple big ranges just to kind of get here. So I think stuff goes probably more coastal and more, Great Basin wise. I think it is just kind of a fact of the topography, but that's just my guess.
Right, I see. Do you have a sense of kind of like a bird coming up from the south, and when it hits the San Gabriels, like how far east and west of Bear Divide does the funnel stretch?
I think the funnel itself that ends up at Bear Divide is really kind of the openings of Cagle Canyon and Little Tahunga Canyon, but I think, it might be a large percentage of the birds that hit the San Gabriels then stay along the edge of the San Gabriels before hitting the funnel. And so so like these two arrows here, can you see my mouse?
Yes.
So like these two arrows here, might go all the way to San Gabriel's, maybe in the San Bernardino. So birds are not just coming up over LA, but they're hitting the mountains way east and then falling until they finally find a place to cross. And so, you could say the funnel is just this here, but you could also say it's, really the whole LA basin in some respect, potentially.
Gotcha. It reminds me very much of birds hitting the Great Lakes when they're moving north.
Yeah.
The United States. Yeah. We're down to just a couple more questions. Kathy had a question about Bear Divide itself. Is this also a spot where condors gather?
It used to be. And about 10 years ago or so, I think they stopped coming there. They changed, it's really close to the Sespe Condor Sanctuary. You can see Sespe from Bear Divide, and the condors used to come that direction, and they kind of changed their routes. And now they all kind of go to Tehachapis and the Sierra Nevada to forage and stuff. And I think that had to do with not only changes in, farmers put out, stillborn calves and stuff for the condors. And I think where farmers were doing that would change, but also the condors in general over the past few years have become much less reliant on that and much more foraging. They've foraged on their own a lot more. That may have also had to do with changing it. So yeah, it used to be, but not anymore.
Just to follow up, and to be explicit about this, if I want to come up and see the migration at Bear Divide, am I allowed to?
No, not you. Everybody else.
Nice. Fair enough. There's been a number of incidents with me up there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not something like, you don't have to plan or get permission or pay or anything. It's public land. There's a huge parking lot. We're usually friendly as long as we've had enough coffee. And the banders are wonderful. They'll show you birds. They'll probably let you release birds. They finished banding on May 15th, and so they're only doing a little bit of intermittent banding after this, but certainly next year. And people are more than welcome to come up, and if I'm there, if we're there, we'll point out birds to you and show you what's going on. And we always love having people come up there. So
Okay.
I try. Go
ahead.
A lot of the movement happens within an hour or so of dawn, which is pretty early these days. Right today a lot of the movement was between 6, 7, 7:30, and so it's a good idea to get there bright and early.
Okay, and if for folks that don't know how to get there, you can go to beardivide.org.
If you go to beardivide.org, there's a pin. A Google Maps pin on the website. You can also look for the Bear Divide picnic area on Google Maps or Apple Maps, and that's just a little bit. It's just a little bit past there, but it'll get you there.
Yeah, once you're at the picnic area, just keep driving up that side road, just another few hundred yards, and you're there.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you see the forest department fire station, that's the spot.
Yep.
You can also buy the birding guide to the greater Pasadena area.
That's true.
Because Bear Divide is in that.
That's true. I ordered my copy a couple days ago.
Yay.
Yeah. We have one final question from Bill in the chat about the bird banders, and he's wondering, do they post their data anywhere? And
no, they don't post it publicly, but they will. They're planning on publishing it in a scientific publication or a series of scientific publications. So the bird banding data works a little differently because we're collecting these observation data. We're free to share it and stuff, but bird banding, you have to get permits from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and you have to submit your data through the National Bird Banding Lab. And so it kind of goes through a different process than other kinds of data. And they're, I think, they're a little less free to, it's a little harder to make it immediately available to the public, even though they will do that. And it just goes through a different process.
Right. I see. And actually, we have one more final question about the banders and you folks up there too. Does your presence or absence and the presence or absence of the growing number of birders that come up there, do you think that affects the birds passing through the divide?
I mean, we have no idea, but I really don't think so. These are birds that are just kind of flying by and flying over. They don't seem to kind of avoid people at all. Sometimes they'll just like go right by your face. I think that, a lot of times birds are very sensitive to people, and birds are very sensitive to, especially development and stuff. But these are birds that are kind of zipping through, and I don't think they necessarily perceive us as predators or really much of anything besides something to try not to run into while they're migrating. So we're not 100% sure, but it as far as I can tell, it doesn't seem to really affect where birds are or aren't in any way.
Okay. And then one final thing, someone reminded me that you posed a question. What's the difference between a hybrid and a?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to give us the answer to that before we?
Mickey answered it.
Okay.
What was the answer? I didn't see.
Scrolling back to see. Mickey said an intergrade is between two subspecies, and a hybrid is between two actual species.
That's correct. That's correct. So bonus points for Mickey.
All right. There you go. And with that, I just want to say, Ryan, thank you so much for coming tonight. Thanks for all the work you've been doing up there, and we look forward to seeing you up at Bear Divide.
Wonderful. I look forward to seeing you all up there. It's getting late in the season, but it's still good. It was great today.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Ryan. That was really amazing. Really blew my mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next month.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And congratulations to Luke and Jane and Gary and Dave. Yay.
Yay.